Hey there, truth seekers. Ever look at your week and think, if God invented naps, why isn't there a commandment about them? Or maybe you've read the Bible and felt the tension. In one corner, the Old Testament shouting, keep the Sabbath holy. Seriously, I'm not joking. And in the other corner, Jesus and his disciples casually strolling through grain fields like they're on a Saturday morning farmer's market run. So, is the seventh day still sacred? Or did Jesus hit the divine reset button? And here's the skeptic zinger. Aha, contradiction. But hold on. Before we let the skeptics drop the mic, let's actually examine it. Welcome to another episode of the Bible Difficulties and Answers podcast. I'm your host, Lance Smith, and this is episode 194 in our Tuesday Contradictions series, Matthew 12, verses 1 to 2. Is it necessary to keep the Sabbath? Every Tuesday, we lift a contradiction from the Skeptic's Annotated Bible and check whether it's really a fatal flaw or just a misunderstanding wearing a fake mustache. This week, they pit the Sabbath of Sinai against Jesus' Sabbath stroll, like the two can't possibly be friends. But here's the truth seeker in me. This isn't a contradiction. It's a storyline, a progression. God lays a foundation with the Sabbath, a weekly reminder of creation, freedom, dignity, justice, and rest. And Jesus fulfills it by taking it deeper than ritual. We're about to walk that road using the New Living Translation, pulling in insights from folks like Thomas Schreiner, John Piper, Timothy Fox, and the very recent scholarship of David Wilber, whose March 2025 article in the E-Journal of Religious and Theological Studies makes a strong case for how Sabbath functioned in Luke Acts. So buckle up, because this gets good. Let's start with what the Skeptic's Annotated Bible throws at us. They say the Bible contradicts itself with a Sabbath yes and a Sabbath no. Their Sabbath yes list is impressive. Exodus 20, verse 8. Remember to observe the Sabbath day by keeping it holy. Big number 4 on the Ten Commandments. Exodus 31, 13 to 16. A perpetual covenant. Sounds permanent enough to carve in stone, which God literally did. Leviticus 23:3, a holy day of complete rest. Deuteronomy 5:12, keep it holy. Isaiah 56:2, blessing for honoring the Sabbath. Then the scary stuff. Exodus 31:14, anyone who desecrates it must be put to death. Numbers 15:32 to 36, the guy picking up sticks, that's a rough day for yard work. Even Hebrews 4 talks about a rest for God's people. Jesus says, pray your escape doesn't fall on the Sabbath, Matthew 24:20. So far, it's a strong yes. But then the no side drops in. Isaiah 1:13, God calls their Sabbaths sinful when their hearts are corrupt. Jesus' disciples pluck grain in Matthew 12:1 to 2, then the Pharisees panic. Jesus heals constantly on the Sabbath. John 5, Luke 13, Luke 14. He calls himself Lord of the Sabbath in Mark 2:27 to 28. Paul says in Romans 14:5 that some consider one day holy, others don't. Decide for yourself. Colossians 2:16, don't let anyone judge you regarding Sabbaths. Cue the skeptics. Boom, Bible contradiction. I've seen smoother arguments in a toddler sandbox. This isn't a contradiction. It's covenant context. It's shadows and substance. Galatians 3:24 reminds us the law was a guardian, leading us to Christ. You don't fire the guardian. You graduate beyond them. Let's head back to the Old Testament. God finishes creation with a rest day in Genesis 2:2 to 3. He commands Israel to rest as a sign of their covenant identity, Exodus 20 and Deuteronomy 5. The Sabbath protests Egypt's nonstop grind. It's a weekly, you are not slaves anymore announcement. It's Penalties are severe because the covenant stakes are high. Israel's entire identity is wrapped around holiness, mercy, justice, and dependence on God. No wonder Isaiah 58 ties Sabbath not to legalism, but to compassion and equity. Now, shift gears into the New Testament. Jesus doesn't demolish the Sabbath, he interprets it correctly. The Pharisees had stacked 39 categories of prohibited work on top of God's original command, turning a gift into a burden. Jesus pushes back. Matthew 12, 1-2, the disciples grab grain because they're hungry. Hunger isn't harvesting. John 5, Jesus heals a man, and instead of rejoicing, the leaders cry, "Hey, work violation." Luke 13 and 14, Jesus publicly dismantles the hypocrisy. You'll pull a donkey out of a ditch, but a woman suffering 13 years can't be healed? Mark 2, 27-28, the Sabbath was made to meet the needs of the people, not people to meet the requirements of the Sabbath. In Hebrews 4, that rest points towards salvation, toward Jesus himself. Now enter David Wilber's new 2025 study, Sabbath Observance in Luke Acts. This thing is a scholarly feast. Wilber argues that Luke intentionally portrays Jesus and his earliest followers as Torah-faithful Jews, including Sabbath keepers. He points out that Luke 4:16 describes Jesus' Sabbath synagogue participation as custom. That's kata to ethos. The same word Luke uses for family festival attendance in chapter 2, verse 42, and Paul's synagogue routines in Acts 17:2. Fitzmyer compares this to Josephus, who says Jews studied Torah every Sabbath. Turner and Yang tried to minimize it, but Wilber calls that anachronistic projection. Luke is highlighting fidelity, not convenience. Jesus' Sabbath conflicts? Wilber dismantles the usual argument that Jesus broke the Sabbath. 4 reasons. 1. Jesus affirms the Torah's enduring validity, Luke 16:17. Walter backs that, still valid without qualification. 2. Casual plucking is allowed, Deuteronomy 23:25, and there's no Torah ban on non-emergency healings. 3. Jesus argues in legal terms that his healings are lawful, Luke 6:9 and 14:3. And 4. Acts shows the apostles constantly in synagogues every Sabbath. And see that in Acts 13, 16, 17, and 18. Paul didn't ditch the Sabbath, he kept it. Frostad notes there's zero controversy about Sabbath abandonment in Acts, which would be bizarre if Christians had stopped keeping it. Luke 23:56, the women rest according to the commandment, even after Jesus dies. Acts 1:12 uses a Sabbath day's journey. That's Jewish law vocabulary. Paul, a self-identified Pharisee in Acts 23:6, lives and worships as a Jew. Gentiles hear Torah weekly on Sabbath, Acts 15:21, which the Jerusalem Council assumes. Wilber argues Luke Acts shows continuity. The early followers of Jesus lived within Judaism, observing Sabbath as part of that identity. That doesn't override Paul's teaching on Gentile freedom, but it does call us to understand early Christianity in its Jewish frame. Now, balancing the conversation, believers today disagree respectfully. Thomas Schreiner, in Is the Sabbath Still Required for Christians?, says Christians aren't bound to the Sabbath because it's not repeated as a command in the New Testament. But he says the principle of rest still applies. John Piper's team at Desiring God, in Should Christians Keep the Sabbath?, says the ceremonial element is gone, but the rhythm remains wise. One day set aside for God, rest, and worship. GotQuestions.org says Sabbath law isn't binding on Christians. Colossians 2:16 makes that clear. But principles remain. John English Lee in The Sabbath and Its Relation to Christ and the Church in the New Covenant teaches that the Sabbath points to Christ. Form shifts, meaning continues. William Lane Craig in The Sabbath Day and Mytho-History argues Sabbath was a sign for Israel, not a universal moral command for all humanity. In Christ, we rest in Him. Timothy Fox, in You Don't Understand the Old Testament, points out the Sabbath is the only one of the 10 Commandments not repeated in the New Testament as a command for Christians, and that's significant. So, is the Sabbath necessary for Christians today? For Israel under the Mosaic Covenant? Absolutely. For Jewish believers today? Many still honor it as covenant identity. For Christians in Christ's new covenant? Not legally binding. Romans 14:5, Colossians 2:16. Jesus fulfills its demands, as we see in Romans 10:4, turning shadows into substance, Colossians 2:17. But the principle, rest, worship, trust, margin, mercy, is holy wisdom. Hebrews 4 reminds us our ultimate Sabbath is Jesus Himself, our rest from striving, guilt, and self-salvation projects. All right, truth seekers, from Sinai stone tablets to the apostles' synagogues to Paul's freedom of conscience teaching, here's the verdict. Not a contradiction, not a trap, not a divine tug of war, just God pointing us toward Christ, the one who says, "Come to me, and I will give you rest." So what about you? What day helps your soul unclench? What rhythm reminds you you're not a machine? Drop us an email at BibleDifficultiesAndAnswers@gmail.com or message us on Facebook. Find us at BibleDifficultiesAndAnswers.podbean.com, and you can also check us out on Apple Podcasts, Spotify, YouTube, all the places where you get your podcasts. I'm Lance Smith. Thanks for listening. Until next time, I wish you good luck, good health, and God bless. So long, everybody.